Good afternoon, everybody. It's the weekend. It's Saturday. We've got an NBA slate, MLB slate, MMA slate. Today, we're going to be covering basketball on this show. We just had a baseball show wrap up, but there is also MMA and NBA, NBA and MLB, NBA, all that stuff also later on the day. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out all the content that we have on the channel. And, you know, these basketball slates, I keep thinking we're going to get some ones, Matt, that have no injury news. Not the case at all, because for this one, Luka Doncic officially listed as questionable. Seems he's going to play with some kind of minutes restriction. Scotty Barnes is questionable. Dylan Brooks is questionable. We've got the Time Lord. He's questionable. Seems like he's going to be playing with a minutes restriction. What is this piece of news, of all the pieces of news we just went through, which one is going to be most important to your lineups?
I guess I'd give the edge to Doncic. I mean, he is expected to play, so we're kind of operating under that assumption, but if he is for some reason surprisingly ruled out, you know, that would leave the team without the highest usage player in the league or one of them. So that would be obviously a big deal, something we'd have to adjust for. We could go right back to guys like Spencer Dinwiddie and Jalen Brunson, etc. But the Scotty Barnes news also is pretty big for me in an elimination game for the Raptors, right? Nick Nurse, we've talked about his insane rotations, and if Barnes is not able to suit up, we could literally see 46 minutes of Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet tonight. So that's another one that I think is a pretty big deal for me.
And then, because we haven't gotten a specific number, what do you think a minutes restriction for Luka means? Does it mean he's going to play Steph Curry minutes where he's coming off the bench and playing 25? Does it mean he starts and plays 32? Does it mean he starts and plays 30? Like, I think there's a wide range of outcomes here. Ultimately, it's going to likely mean I don't get any exposure to him because he's still, not expensive for Luka Doncic, but he's still a pay-up option. It's hard for me to get behind him if he's only going to be playing 30 minutes or so. But I have been struggling with how many minutes he's going to play. What is your prediction there?
I would say 30 to 32. I doubt he comes off the bench. And I agree with you on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, he's 9,500. I think 30 minutes of Luka Doncic at 9,500 still warrants exposure. So I will have some there. But on DraftKings, honestly, I think it's a good day. And it's kind of refreshing, to be honest. Like, all season, it's just been stars and scrubs. And I think in these playoff slates, there are some nice opportunities to build some more mid-range viable teams. You're still going to want some 8K plus players, but I don't think you're necessarily doomed if you don't pay up for the top guys.
Yeah, and by the way, Stephen Leibowitz brings up a very good point. Chad, remember, Greg, coaches lie. This is also a very true point. Just because they say Luka Doncic has a minutes restriction doesn't mean Luka Doncic has a minutes restriction. So there is a possibility that he goes out, he's playing well, he feels good, and they just leave him out there for a lot of the game. But we'll see. That is a fair point by Stephen Leibowitz, but I think it does seem somewhat reasonable that we're going to end up seeing him with some kind of minutes restriction. Super chat from Picasso TV hit for 10K last night. You guys are the GOATs. Congratulations. That's a nice win for you. I'll be curious.
Your ear off.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, don't do that. That'll be a weird way to celebrate. That was Van Gogh, I think. Yeah, I was about to say that was Van Gogh, not Picasso. I'm sure Picasso did weird shit too, though. He painted all those people that kind of look like Pinocchio with like weird faces. That was him, right?
Yeah, he was the abstract. I'm not an art dude at all, but I know he made weird shit.
Yeah, no, I'm not an art dude. I have tried to be an NFT dude, which also did not work out for me. I don't know what the hell I'm buying. I just buy shit like, have I made money now? And then the answer is always no.
Yeah, Greg, you're never right, with a bunch of weird faces. Yeah,
it was
Picasso.
Yeah. Well, at least he didn't cut his ear off. And one other thing I want to ask you about, just kind of overarching thoughts on the slate before we start talking position by position. What the hell is wrong with Karl-Anthony Towns in the playoffs?
I mean, we're talking about a 3-game sample here, and one of them wasn't necessarily okay. I guess 4. Yeah, I don't know. There's always a learning curve, or there typically is a learning curve for young players in their first postseason, but it hasn't seemed to have phased some of the other young dudes on this team and on Memphis. So I don't know. He caught a lot of flack for sort of his just brushing it off in game 3, saying he was just going to go home and drink some wine and forget about it. But I think I have no long-term concerns about Karl Anthony Towns, at least at this point.
All right. So we'll be talking about him later because I do think, he's gotten priced down quite a bit over on DraftKings. And then, FanDuel, there's only one center we could play, but he's power forward eligibility at 8,900. So I think that he's going to be a decent buy low in this spot because I just can't believe he's going to continue to be this bad. Like Karl Anthony Towns just stringing together the worst games of his career. So if you now go back to, like we said, it's 3 playoff games, the play-in game, not officially a play-in game, a playoff game, but it's kind of officiated like it's a playoff game, which I think is kind of the difference between these, where the game's a little more physical, the fouls are a little looser. So 4 games for Karl Anthony Towns, what we'll call post-regular season, 23 fantasy points against the Clippers, game 1 against Memphis, that was a win. He scored 52. Then game 3, he put up 33. Then game 2, 33. Last game, he put up 23 fantasy points. Poor showing for Karl Anthony Towns to this point. We'll talk about that later. But first, I want to start by asking you about the guard position and who are the guards that you are getting to the most as of now?
I have to say my favorite guard in the expensive tier, at least, is Donovan Mitchell. He's 8,700. I think that Donovan Mitchell is kind of being slept on this slate and really in the playoffs in general. But the guy's playing 40 minutes a night. He's got a sky high usage rate. He hasn't shot the ball particularly well to start the playoffs. He was 10 for 29 in game 1, 13 for 30 in game 2. He was a bit better in game 3, but still sub 50%. And he still scored at least 45 DraftKings points in each of those games. So I think getting him at 8,700 is just, it's too cheap, right? Like on an average game from him, I'm expecting north of 45 fantasy points. And if he does have a hot shooting night, like we saw last year in the postseason, this guy can get to 60. He can get to even higher than that potentially. So I think that his upside is very similar to a guy like Ja Morant, who is priced $1,000 more. Really, the only guard that I think has a notably higher ceiling would be Doncic if for some reason you felt that he was going to play significant minutes today. So I really like Donovan Mitchell at 8,700, especially since he's coming in with projected ownership of right around 20%.
So I agree with you, but in general, I agree with you. There's one thing I'm going to slightly disagree with, and I'll explain why. I am also overweight to the field on Donovan Mitchell. I like him quite a bit. However, I think there's a pay-up guard with more upside than him, and it's James Harden because of the injury to Joel Embiid. I understand Embiid's going to play through it, but it seems like the tweets we've seen and the reports we've seen is that there's concern this is a significant injury. And It appears Joel Embiid is going to be playing through it anyway in the playoffs. He's going to be the runner-up for MVP this year. He had a really good regular season, and he doesn't want to have that go to shame or go to waste. He's going to play through it, gut it out. I think, though, this could mean a little bit extra ball handling duties, a little bit extra usage for James Harden. So I did divert some of the usage I would typically give to Embiid to Harden, and that does make me slightly prefer Harden over on DK, similar price, 9,100 for Harden, 8,700 for Donovan Mitchell. Over on FanDuel, the positions have just been so weird for Harden. For whatever reason, he's just been a small forward all year, but still 8,700 for him, shooting guard, small forward. I also like him quite a bit on FanDuel. So that's my case for Harden there. Like I said, I like Donovan Mitchell also, but I wanted to ask you the narrative on Harden. I know it's hard to really buy into what coaches and what teams say, but with the coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, he's an actual doctor, Doc Rivers. So this is important when we're talking about diagnosing an injury here. Do you think it's reasonable that we see a little bit of an extra role out of Harden going forward because of the health concerns with Embiid?
Doc Rivers is a doctor like Dr. Pepper, maybe Dr. Dre. I think it's reasonable, but I'm going to need to see it first, right? I mean, Harden or Embiid clearly looked fine at the end of game 3, right? Drilled a turnaround jumper from 3-point range to give the team the win. I'm going to need to see it from Embiid before I start cranking Harden's usage rate up. I agree with you, though. He is underpriced on this slate. I think that him and Mitchell are both strong plays. I like them both. I'm going to be overweight on both. I'm just giving Mitchell a slight edge just because I feel more comfortable with his workload than I do with Harden's. Harden makes up for it with the assists. He's a pretty good rebounder. Not that he's shown it a ton recently, but Donovan Mitchell is a guy who's going to be like near 40% from a usage rate. James Harden's probably going to be closer to like 25, but he'll do stuff in the peripheral category. So again, both guys really strong. You can play them together. They're not that expensive. I just give Mitchell the slightest of edges.
Yeah, and once again, I'm overweight to both of them. And once again, with Harden, do we know when Embiid got hurt?
No.
Yeah, I haven't really seen any information on that, because I'd kind of be curious on that too, how the injury actually occurred. Was it something where he kind of felt it towards the tail end of last game and it didn't bother him until after the fact? I don't know, but there's also weird things where like he's going to get an MRI after this game, but there are fears that it's a serious injury. I mean, if you don't want to know the results, why even get the MRI done? But I mean, it seems like unless that hand needs to be amputated, which isn't going to be the case, he's going to be playing through it in all likelihood. The other one that I think is a pretty key talking point for me with guard eligibility on both FanDuel and DraftKings, Dillon Brooks, who has largely sucked in this series from a fantasy standpoint, 27, 17, and 20 fantasy points, but he's so cheap and he plays such a big role for the Grizzlies that I still think he's a very good value play on both FanDuel and DraftKings, but FanDuel especially at his price point if he's out there, because a $4,700 price tag for Dillon Brooks, who's shooting guard and small forward eligibility, when we're expecting him to play close to 40 minutes if healthy, that's a smash. But here's the issue. He's listed as questionable, and I tend to think he's going to gut it out and play through it, but I don't know that for sure. And then also because of the way that the games are staggered, it's a 10 o'clock start time. It is the last game of the slate. So if Dillon Brooks is to get ruled out, it's not like there's a lot of swapping options. So how are you going to handle Dillon Brooks? Because I have him in a lot of lineups right now, and I don't feel great about it because, once again, just the injury status of when the start time that game is.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more pessimistic about Brooks's availability. You tend to think questionable during the playoffs means you're more than likely going to play. But given how badly he struggled and the fact that the Grizzlies are up 2-1 in this series, I don't think it would be a shock to give him a night off, especially since Dillon Brooks missed significant time during the regular season. They know how to play without him. They have, a relatively deep team and can fill that spot with, more Desmond Bane, more DeAnthony Melton, more Zaire Williams. So I'm a little bit more pessimistic about it, but if Brooks plays, you're getting a great value. There's no doubt about it. The price tag on him is just too cheap. It really comes down to how much risk you're willing to absorb. And it's a bit easier on DraftKings because Patrick Beverley is 5,400. That's a pretty easy pivot. If you put Brooks in the guard spot, it's a little bit tougher to find a pivot for Brooks on FanDuel just because he is so cheap.
Yeah, and by the way, people in the chat are saying, no, don't play Brooks, play Bane. I like both Brooks and Bane. These are guys that I'm both getting to, and just based on what their price point is, you could play both of them in lineups, and it's not problematic. Obviously, it's an issue if Brooks doesn't play, but with a $4,700 price tag for Dillon Brooks on FanDuel, $6,000 for Bane, both of that is playable, and then they're $5,600 and $6,200 on DK also. Both playable price points. Do you have any issues with playing them both together, or do you have a lean of which one you prefer?
Let's see. They have a correlation of negative 0.25 this season on FanDuel. So that kind of makes sense when you think about it. They're really like the second and third options for the Grizzlies offensively. It would make sense to me that when one player goes off, the other one tends not to. The price tags are at a point where I'm not overly concerned about that. Again, 4,700 is just too cheap for Dillon Brooks, who has still played like 36 minutes and is going to get his shots up when he's on the floor. But I would be a little bit more wary of playing them in the same lineup. Yeah.
And then people also bring up the Kyle Anderson point. Yeah, Kyle Anderson would look a little bit better if Brooks is ruled out. I'm already getting to some of Kyle Anderson because I think he starts. Maybe they go with Brandon Clark as the starter in this game. I mean, that's been such a difficult rotation to predict in terms of what they've done with the big men. But yeah, Kyle Anderson would look a little bit better if Dillon Brooks is out. As for other guards, also, I'm getting to Mike Conley a lot. You mentioned how much you like Donovan Mitchell. I agree. I also like Mike Conley. I think we have to consider the situations for some of these teams. The Jazz are down 2-1. I think we're going to see big minutes from Conley, big minutes from Mitchell, big minutes from Gobert. And I think it's reasonable to project all of these guys to play 3 to 4 extra minutes. That makes all of them look pretty good on a points per dollar basis. Do you have the same feelings about Mike Conley?
Yes, I like Mike Conley quite a bit. I mean, he's already been playing like 36 minutes during the postseason, or 34, 35. But he's a fantasy point per minute type of guy. If you don't want to give him a couple of extra minutes, just 34 minutes at a fantasy point per minute would be excellent value at 5,500. So I think he's very reasonable for me at his current price tag. I mentioned Patrick Beverley. He's right in that same range. I like both guys. I give Conley the edge. I think he's just a little bit of a better offensive player. Not a huge hot take right there, but both guys playing nice minutes, both guys, solid per minute producers. So I think that range is another pretty appealing spot for the point guard position.
Yeah. And then also just kind of looking through the rest of the guards here, I wanted to ask you about one other player just because he's really chalky. Gary Trent Jr. is projected for 34% ownership on FanDuel, 31% on DraftKings. Scotty Barnes officially listed as questionable, at least according to reports. If Scotty Barnes plays, he isn't going to have a minutes restriction. I think it's probably similar to the Gary Trent situation from game 2, where he had the illness, he played, and it was just, let's see what Gary Trent has. And he ended up playing 10 minutes and was like, I can't continue. I think we probably might see something similar with Scotty Barnes. By the way, do you see Barnes was just named Rookie of the Year?
I did not.
Yes, Scotty Barnes, Rookie of the Year. Unfortunate for me, I'd been betting Mobley since the start of the year. I had him as long as 14-1. And if he was a lock to win if he didn't get hurt, then the narrative was just against him once he got hurt. But the voting was super close between the two of them. Last I looked, they had the same exact amount of votes. So it was difference of just probably a few votes or so between him and Mobley. But that aside, now Rookie of the Year, Scotty Barnes, how would his possible return to the lineup impact a really chalky Gary Trent? Would it change how you view him?
Yeah, I'm going to be probably underweight on Trent either way. I mean, he's going to play a ton of minutes regardless of Barnes's status. But if Barnes is in, I definitely don't think you want to play a chalk Gary Trent Jr. There's just slightly lower usage rate. He doesn't need to play 46 minutes like he did in game 2. Game 3. Granted, that game went to overtime. But I think in general, Trent is somebody that you want to be a little bit underweight on. Now, I should note, in the boom bust tool, Gary Trent still has a positive leverage rating. So he's somebody that, on DraftKings, he's 5,200. It's just hard to find players in that price range that you can feel comfortable with, right? So Gary Trent Jr. is still popping in the optimal lineup pretty frequently. But I would rather go with Mike Conley for an extra $300. He's going to carry slightly less ownership, and I just feel a little bit safer with him.
Yeah, and for me with Conley also, the other thing, Trent is so highly volatile this year, like to a ridiculous extent. How many times have we seen Gary Trent be a chalk play and totally suck with everybody out for the Raptors? Just be like, hey, Trent is going to have to do stuff for this team. And then it'll be the next game, everybody's back. It's like, oh, look, Trent is like 6,500 and way overpriced and 2% owned. Oh, Gary Trent is 8 for 8 from 3 in the first half. He's just been really difficult to predict. The upside is apparent for him, but I don't think the potential return of Scotty Barnes is getting weighed enough when it comes to how the field is viewing these guys. So I'm going to be underweight to the field on Trent. I'm with you. I also prefer Mike Conley if I'm looking at a guard at a fairly similar price. I have Conley projected quite a bit higher. I understand it's do or die situations for both of these teams, but Conley's just better than Gary Trent in my opinion. So that's where I'm staking my claim here, and I think we're on the same page with that. Any other guards that are key pieces of your build that we've not talked about yet?
Yeah, Fred VanVleet for me at 7,900. He's gonna play 42 plus minutes tonight. It's just a fact. I think you can write that in stone, barring a Raptors blowout win, which I don't think anyone is expecting. So his price tag has come down. His production hasn't been great recently. He's under a fantasy point per minute over the past month, but he's still at 1.08 for the year. I think if you're going to give him 42, 43 minutes, 7,900 works for him. He's somebody that I plan on being overweight to the field on as well.
Yeah, and I think we're pretty same there. Let me look at some of the ownership. Is there anybody you're taking a flyer on that's, say, like sub 15% owned at the guard position?
Let's take a peek.
We've got low ownership coming in on Kyrie today. He's sub 10% owned on both DraftKings. FanDuel right around 10%. by the way, we just got news. Scotty Barnes will play today. So let's talk about that. Well, a lot of Scotty Barnes news at once. Named Rookie of the Year. Now finding out that he's going to play. So let's hit this from him playing angle. First, what do you expect from him? And then how does that impact the other guys on the slate? I feel good about coming underweight to a very chalky Gary Trent Jr. now.
Yeah, no doubt about that. It clearly impacts everybody from a usage perspective. I believe, and I'm going to just run a quick on off here, but I believe Trent sees the biggest usage decrease when sharing the court with Scotty Barnes this season. So he probably stands out as the biggest loser. Pascal Siakam's usage rate also decreases by 1.4% in that situation. So I do think you probably want to tone back, some of your Toronto exposure, right? Like I was very overweight on VanVleet and Siakam and OG Anunoby. I will probably trim all of those back, especially with this being the first game on the slate and a game with such a small total. I think now you should prioritize maybe a little bit more flexibility as opposed to trying to grab Toronto value in a, backs against the wall situation.
Yeah, the only thing that gives me a little bit of hesitation is since they're down 3-0, I think there's potential for Pascal Siakam to go out and play like 46 minutes or something crazy because this is Nick Nurse and we know that he does weird things with his rotation. So I still want some exposure to Fred VanVleet and Scott and Pascal Siakam. I don't feel great about anybody else there right now. Those two guys, I think the minutes are so secure and they're both good enough that I think they're still playable. Would you at least agree with that standpoint?
Yeah, yes, for sure. And I'm not saying I'm coming off of them entirely, but I'm just saying instead of them being sort of like core pieces for my build, they will now be more secondary pieces.
Yep. Same. That's right there. I mean, I wasn't exactly sure what to do with Barnes, but we did get news now that he's in. I assume he's going to be starting. We haven't gotten that starting lineup yet, have we? Let's see. No starting lineup, just word that Scotty Barnes will play. So we'll see what that starting lineup looks like. And assuming he's in, then I think we have to feel pretty good about his at least chance to play bigger minutes. And then we'll take it from there. I forget, did you answer the question? Because we got the Scotty Barnes news. Was there anybody like really low owned at the guard that you're looking at as a contrarian guy to take some GPP shots on?
Well, the guy was, and he's not super low owned, but it was OG Anunoby. I think on FanDuel in particular, Anunoby is really cheap. But even at 6,700 on DraftKings, I was getting overweight on his projected ownership of 12.7%. With Barnes back, that price tag isn't quite as appealing, but I do still think that a lot of the stuff we've said about VanVleet and Siakam also applies to Anunoby, right? He's playing all the minutes he can handle. He's a pretty good per minute guy. He scored at least 32 DraftKings points in all three playoff games. So I still feel like he is probably being overlooked a bit, but I don't feel as confident now that we have this Barnes news.
Yep, I think we are also on the same page there. You and I in alignment with a lot of things. Even the one thing we had a minor quibble about between Harden and Mitchell. I like Mitchell a lot anyway. As for some guys that I'm taking a shot on, Seth Curry is making into some of my lineups. I think he looks healthy. He just has to start making his shots more regularly. He did that last game. He shot 4 of 6 from 3, once again, we have one of these slates where there's just not that much value to like because we've got players coming back from injury. Seth Curry is projected for 12% ownership over on FanDuel. DraftKings, he's projected for 15% ownership. He's 43 and 4,500. It's a relatively cheap price for Curry, who I think is going to continue to look at over 30 minutes. And with all the attention that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant bring on defenses, Seth Curry gets open looks. As long as he makes some of them, there's a ceiling here. And we've talked about this a few times over the course of the playoffs, but you don't need these cheap guys to go out and score like 40 fantasy points like you do in the regular season. If you can just get like 25 to 30, you're sitting pretty good because it lets you pay up for all the stars on these slates. Does Curry make it into any of your lineups?
Yeah, I have a sprinkling of him, a sprinkling of Goran Dragic for the same reason. Dragic has actually quietly had at least 23 in back-to-back games. He posted a 32.8% usage rate in their last contest. So I kind of like him at 4,100. I've also got just a little bit of Reggie Bullock at 4,900. I mean, the guy's played 44 plus minutes in 3 straight games. Even if you take some of those away and give him to Luka, I still think he's probably going to play, 38 minutes or so. And these are all guys that can score, and you're just kind of hoping that this is the night that they make shots. So I'm kind of just spraying and praying in that range, getting a little bit of everybody. Jordan Clarkson also in a few of my lineups at 4,500. So that's kind of how I'm approaching that range. But yes, Dragic, Curry in my player pool tonight.
If you guys want access to all of the Awesemo Plus tools that we have for basically every single DFS sport out there, you could sign up for an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95, get you access to stuff like our player projections, ownership projections for NBA, and of course, all the tools we have for MLB with that going on. But if you're just somebody who plays NBA DFS, we also have NBA DFS packages for as low as $4.95 weekly. So that's something you could use to get your foot in the door. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. All right, Matt, let's move on over to the forwards now. And a lot of the guys that we've talked about at guards have forward eligibility. We've got Dylan Brooks here. We've got Seth Curry. I just talked about him. He also has small forward eligibility. Other guys, like Desmond Bane, he's small forward over on FanDuel. We've talked about Scotty Barnes, James Harden, inexplicably a small forward on FanDuel. But who are the forwards that are making it into your lineups that don't have guard eligibility that we haven't mentioned yet?
It kind of blows my mind that Kevin Durant is projected for sub 15% ownership on this slate.
He's been bad.
I'll take that for sure all day, every day. We know how Steve Nash likes to coach in these back against the wall situations. And his answer is, Kevin, please save me. Go play 46 minutes and deliver. We saw that against the Bucks in the postseason last year. And I think he was pretty good, if memory serves, in that series. Maybe one of the greatest postseason series performances that I've ever seen. So I mentioned being underweight on a lot of the, true high-end 10K plus type guys today. Kevin Durant is the exception. I will be overweight to his, sub 15% ownership. I think that if you're telling me that someone came out and scored 70 plus fantasy points today, he's my bet on the most likely to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the upside there is very clear. This Celtics defense, though, is an absolute beast, especially if they're getting Robert Williams back, even in limited minutes, which seems like it's going to be the case. If you just get 20 minutes of Robert Williams instead of 20 minutes of Daniel Tice, it's a pretty big upgrade for the Celtics. Obviously, the upside is very clear in Kevin Durant, but I think the struggles, part of it is he's not making shots that he would normally make, but the other part, too, is this is one of the most difficult matchups anybody could go against. The Celtics defense is ridiculously good. So I see why there's some concerns there with the field that and just looking at what he's done in the first couple games of the series. Here's something else, though. Do you want to know why I really want the Celtics to win this game other than my existing bets? If the Celtics win, Ben Simmons has the opportunity to do something nobody else has ever done in NBA history.
I heard this on the radio.
He could play back-to-back games getting eliminated from a playoff series. That's impossible.
Yes, as a New Yorker, I mean, you're close, you're tri-state area, but the Ben Simmons hatred Like the guy hasn't even played a game for this team yet, and he's already just so hated by Nets fans, the 6 of them that exist. They're like, if this guy is healthy enough to play in game 4, why can't he try and gut it out in game 3? I don't know. I don't make a living trying to get Ben Simmons on a basketball court. It would be hilarious if that's what ends up happening. If he shows up in game 4 and just gets eliminated for the second straight time he's played basketball. And then maybe he'll need another sabbatical. Who knows?
Yeah, it's I'm very strongly rooting for the Celtics in this series anyway, just because of my betting interests. And also one of the reasons why on the other side of this game, you mentioned Kevin Durant. I love getting to Jason Tatum because he is playing big minutes in this series and he's doing everything for Boston right now. He's not just somebody who's only scoring. We're also seeing rebounds. We're seeing assists. We're seeing defensive stats. The 2 games in the series, Jason Tatum's averaging 9 assists. We've never seen this kind of playmaking from him before. He's really putting it together and becoming one of the best players in the NBA. How hot of a take is it to say at this point in their careers all around that you'd rather have Tatum than Kevin Durant? Tatum's an infinitely better defensive player.
Yeah. Kevin Durant has always been good at defense when he tries on that end. I would still rather have Kevin Durant if I needed to win 1 game. But if I was building a team, I don't think it's that crazy considering the age difference and the injury history.
Yeah, and at the very least, it's at the very least it's closer, and I think a lot of people would make it out to be. I would still go towards Durant, but the way that Tatum has also developed his passing game as of late, and by the way, even though it's come together in the playoffs, we saw this down the stretch of the season. Now, if you go back over the last the last month of the regular season, he's averaging about 7 assists per game. So he's been a guy who's developed this part of his game also. And then also the defensive end of the court. I mean, there's a reason why the Celtics are the best defense in the league. There's a reason why Marcus Smart won Defensive Player of the Year. And Marcus Smart is not the best defensive player on the team. It is Robert Williams, but Robert Williams is hurt down the stretch of the season. So like the same reason Robert Williams doesn't win Defensive Player of the Year, same reason that Evan Mobley didn't win Rookie of the Year is just injuries at the end of the year. But to be a really good defense, you have to have more than one good defensive player. Tatum's been a big reason as to why. But moving on with the rest of the forwards, how are you going to be handling Kyle Anderson and the front court rotation for the Memphis Grizzlies? Because I have found it impossible to predict.
I don't think you're the only one there. I'll have a bit of him. I mean, he did get a nice extended run in the last game. It seems like Steven Adams is now like completely out of the picture. So that's at least a little bit of a help there. But, I think regardless of what happens, Dillon Brooks is in, Dillon Brooks is out. It doesn't really matter all that much for Anderson. He's kind of locked into that 20 to 24-ish minutes range would be my projection for him. So I think he is a fine play at that price tag, but I don't think he's like a slam dunk value.
Yeah. So, I mean, I also don't know what the starting lineup is. By the way, we just got the Raptors starting lineup and Scotty Barnes not starting. That makes me feel not so great about the minutes he's going to get. All right. I'm just going to get back to Siakam, I guess. And
let's do it. I love
he's not starting. I just assume he's going to, I know they said there's no minutes restriction. Well, if that was really the case,
that's not a good start. Yeah, that's not a good start to the Scotty Barnes game 4.
Because if you're not restricting somebody's minutes, if you're bringing them off the bench, you're restricting their minutes. If they're not playing at the start of the game, that artificially impacts the amount of minutes they could play. So I have to think this means, I don't know. What do you think is a reasonable expectation? Like 25 minutes for Scotty Barnes?
It's hard to put a number on it because I think it's going to come down to how he feels, right? I don't think it's necessarily like I don't think Nick Nurse is lying. I think he really doesn't have a minutes restriction. His body is going to dictate how much he can play.
I think this is really similar to the Gary Trent situation. Like I said before in game 2, he's going to go out. If he feels good, he's going to play bigger minutes. If he doesn't, he might play like 10 minutes like we saw from Gary Trent. I think Scotty Barnes way too risky to play. Maybe slightly dampens the upside of some other Raptors players, but I'm going to like VanVleet. I'm going to like Siakam now, considering that we have this news with Scotty Barnes coming off the bench. It does open up some extra usage. By the way, the starting lineup for the Toronto Raptors, same as last game. It is the lineup they normally run, but Khem Birch in the starting lineup instead of Scotty Barnes. So overall, it is VanVleet, Trent, Anunoby, Siakam, Khem Birch. If Trent was in, if Barnes was starting, it would have been Barnes instead of Birch, and then Siakam at center in all likelihood. But that is what the starting lineup now looks like for them. Getting back to the forwards here, I'm landing on a lot of Jared Vanderbilt. I kind of find him unavoidable because he played 32 minutes last game. He remains really cheap, particularly on DraftKings. He is only 3,700, and I'm kind of confused why he isn't just the stone cold chalk on this slate. 3,700 on DK projected for 22% ownership. Over on FanDuel, even the 4,800 I think is a playable price point. He is crazy contrarian at 6% owned. What am I missing that Vanderbilt isn't more popular after he played over 30 minutes and is now playing backup center minutes as well?
Yeah, I think it's just the fact that people are a bit scared off by the fact that he played 9 minutes the game prior. So I am with you. I much prefer Jared Vanderbilt at his price to Kyle Anderson. The $600 that you're saving can help. So I like Vanderbilt. He is somebody that when I'm not spending up, he is the preferred forward option for me.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, like, I think there would be decisions for me to make if Vanderbilt was, say, like 50% owned. But, as it is right now, I haven't projected for 22 fantasy points, 3,700 on DK, even the 4,800 on FanDuel, because once again, he brings a lot of defensive stats to the table, so he looks a little bit better there. Just in terms of what his projection is, I think he's going under-owned. I'm going to have Vanderbilt as a pretty high priority GPP play for me. Are there any other cheap forwards that you're looking at?
Cheap forwards? Not really. Forward is kind of a crapshoot once you get towards the bottom. I mean, I think Brandon Clark is still playable at 5K, but he is going to be exceedingly popular tonight. I mentioned Reggie Bullock and Seth Curry. They both have forward eligibility in addition to guard eligibility. You can get to them. Like Royce O'Neal plays a ton of minutes, but he just kind of sucks. Yeah, no. So the answer is no. I mean, if Dylan Brooks is out, then I would possibly consider going with some Zaire at 3,300 because I think he's a candidate to move into the starting lineup. But that's really the only, sort of like low ownership, cheap guy that I'm really considering.
Yeah, I'm landing on some Royce O'Neal, mostly just because of the price. And then I think his minutes are fairly secure or the first 3 games of the series, 31, 37, and 32 minutes from Royce O'Neal. And then also just to reiterate the talking point that we brought up when it came to Donovan Mitchell, when it came to Mike Conley, this is a situation the Jazz need to win this game, and I think there's a good chance we see the starters play more minutes. We see a little bit of a condensed rotation. I assume that Juancho Hernan-Gomez falls out of the rotation, and some of those minutes go to Rudy Gobert. Some of them go to Royce O'Neal. I think people don't really realize this about the Jazz. They suck on defense outside of Rudy Gobert. They have Rudy Gobert is a ridiculously good, I think the most valuable, him and Draymond, I think are the 2 most valuable defensive players in the league right now. The only other above average defensive player on the Jazz right now, maybe Mike Conley. He's a little bit slower now than he was earlier in his career. And Royce O'Neal. Outside of that, Rudy Gobert has to do everything by himself. If you watched the game last time when they had Gobert off the court, and it was just Spencer Dinwiddie and Jalen Brunson getting to the rim at will, because Donovan Mitchell, I think there's like a tier like Donovan Mitchell, Trae Young, John Morant, guys who are just turnstiles on defense. Guys just walk around them and get to the basket. And they just didn't have that rim protection of Gobert behind them. So I do think we're going to see extra minutes out of Gobert and Royce O'Neal to try to shore up the defensive lapses that we saw in the last game they lost at home. So I get to Royce O'Neal for that reason. Not like a crazy high priority play. I prefer Vanderbilt for cheap. But there just aren't that many like sub 4K guys to get to on DK. So that's kind of where Royce O'Neal fits the bill for me. What are you doing with, well, number one, are you getting to him at all? I know you mentioned him kind of in passing there.
Yeah, I have a touch, but it's hard to get too excited about a guy. Over his last 13 games, so we're talking a pretty decent sample size here, he has averaged 0.44 DraftKings points per minute. That is quite possibly the worst mark I have ever seen for a player. He didn't attempt a shot in their last game. He was 0 for 0 from the field. That said, he did post 30.25 DraftKings points 2 games ago on a 9% usage rate. So it's not like this guy needs a ton of shots to score. He can give us some value on the glass and with his defensive statistics. So I do have just a pinch of him, but the per minute upside just really turns me off.
Mighty Mouse Demetrius Johnson leaving us a super chat. Can we play Luka Doncic on sub ownership with fake minutes limit? If the game is competitive, he's playing 38 plus minutes. I don't know that it's a fake minutes limit. I don't know what to expect from Luka. If he plays 30 minutes or 20, I wouldn't be surprised by that. So I think it's
a fake minutes limit, you should be going all in on Luka Doncic.
Yeah. I don't know what the minutes look like. I'm not going to come out and like have some fake confidence, tell you I'm really confident how many minutes Luka plays. I think the range of outcomes from him is probably like 28 to 38. That's the range I'll say. And I'd say he's probably going to be close to 30. I project him for 32. And I think
here's why I don't think it's a fake minutes limit. If they felt all that confident in Doncic, he would have played last game.
Yeah, true.
And Dallas won that game without him. So it's not like Dallas is in a situation where they need Luka to go out and carry them to a victory tonight. It's just, that's not in the cards. It's not what they need. And for the record, Dallas has actually, it's kind of like a Ja Morant situation. Dallas has actually been surprisingly good with Doncic off the court this season. So I take the coach Jason Kidd here at his word. I think Luka Doncic plays sub 32 minutes tonight. That's kind of where I'm projecting him at. I don't think that they're gonna there's no benefit to pushing him when they have a 2-1 series lead.
Yeah, and something else also, which I think it's not the perfect indication. I know a lot of people think like, oh, Vegas or sportsbooks, they know information we don't, which is absolutely not true, especially because yesterday DK left Bobby Portis, stale Bobby Portis lines up until tip. Like they made a change to him starting as opposed to coming off the bench. They don't know everything. But that aside, if you want an indication of how the market is reacting to the news, last game, the Jazz were 7-point favorites at home against the Dallas Mavericks. Today, 5.5 points. Luka's worth more than 1.5 points, but it's just kind of an indication that there is an expectation he's going to have some kind of minutes restriction. How restricted, I don't know, but I don't think we should write it off totally as fake. But I do think at the very least, it makes Spencer Dinwiddie and Jalen Brunson unplayable.
Correct. Yes, I agree with you there.
Super chat from Jeff Williams. Is Precious still a good play today with Barnes back and this starting lineup on a DK high dollar GPP? That is a no for me. I am not getting to Precious Achiuwa at all. Are you?
I had some pre the Barnes news, but I will take him out of my player pool, or at least trim him down to just being like a 5 to 10% guy. I hate the Khem Birch thing. I don't know why teams do this. I don't know, like, what's the incentive of starting a guy and then playing him like 12 to, it makes no sense to me. They should just start Precious, but with the way that the roster is the rotation is constructed currently, it's very hard to get behind him at 4,300.
Yeah, same. I'm on the same boat as you, because the other thing too is Precious Achiuwa was the first man off the bench last game. I assume Scotty Barnes is now the first man off the bench, and if Scotty Barnes plays well, he's going to be in the closing lineup. The closing lineup is going to be VanVleet, Trent, Barnes, Anunoby, Siakam, if there are no issues with Scotty Barnes. So that really does limit what we could expect out of Precious Achiuwa. So once again, it's going to be dependent on Scotty Barnes. If something happens where Barnes only plays 10 minutes or gets hurt again, that's also going to change things. Somebody in chat also mentioned Josh Green has been getting more minutes. Also, that was because Luka was out. Josh Green might be out of the rotation today.
Yeah, it's nice for the Mavericks that, he might be something in the future, but he's not in their plans at the moment.
Also, Luka officially upgraded to probable on the last injury report. So like we expected, he's going to play. The expectation is also for a minutes restriction. Is it real? Is it fake? Watch the games later to find out. Or do this. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you like the video, you are 215% more likely to be on the right side of Luka Doncic's minutes restriction today. Just good science. Super chat from Michael Wynn. What are we doing with Malik Beasley? 4,200 on DK and getting double-digit shots. So for me personally, I am playing very minimal amounts of Beasley. He's in my player pool, but less than 10% owned. The reason that we've seen some of the increased playing time from him, and the shots, just if Michael Beasley's on the court, Malik Beasley, the same goes for Michael Beasley though. But any of the Beasleys are on the court.
If you're a Beasley and you're on the floor,
if you're a Beasley and you're in the NBA, you're on the court, you're shooting, and you're not looking to do anything else. But there's been so much foul issues in this series on both sides. Both Memphis and Minnesota, these teams could not stop fouling each other. They are hacking constantly. And Beasley's minutes are very predicated on Towns, Russell, Edwards, Beverly. All of these guys have gotten into foul trouble, and then they just go to Beasley next. If we get a game where these guys don't get in foul trouble, the minutes and the usage for Beasley evaporate because a couple of things happen. Number one, just there's less playing time available, but then also when he's on the court with those guys, it's a big difference playing with Edwards and with Russell as opposed to those guys being on the bench because of potential foul issues. So I think that we shouldn't expect the current playing time in Beasley to keep up. Is he somebody you're rostering at all?
No, I have zero Beasley because the way he's priced, he's sandwiched right in between Clarkson and Dragic. I like both of those other guys better.
Yep, I agree with that as well. And by the way, the foul trouble thing also, it has to come back to it. There's just no way these teams continue to foul at this rate. Jaren Jackson Jr. probably will, but the other players, not as much.
That wasn't a challenge, Jaren Jackson Jr., okay? You're allowed to contest without fouling.
The other thing too, when it comes to the fouling of Jaren Jackson Jr., it makes him so hard for me to play. Like there's considerable upside in Jaren Jackson. I've just not been rostering him in this series because it's the spot against Karl-Anthony Towns that makes him even more prone to get into foul issues. So there's clear upside there. One of these days he's going to stay out of foul trouble and he's going to score like 50 fantasy points. I haven't been getting there in this series. I'm not doing it today. Are you?
No, I don't think that the upside is as high as we think it is. I think that Brandon Clark is like a legit part of this, a timeshare with Jaren Jackson. You know, Jackson probably can play, 30 minutes, 32 minutes if he stays out of foul trouble, but I don't think that the path for him getting to like 36 minutes realistically exists. I think it's a situation where even if he does stay out of foul trouble, Memphis just has so many big guys and they've kind of proven that they're going to play them all except for Steven Adams.
Yeah. Steven Adams, 0-minute guy now. 0 minutes last game. I have him projected for 0 minutes. It seems like he's out of the rotation. They don't like him in this spot. If he ends up starting, I will just throw myself out a window because it's just a situation I don't want to deal with at all. Super chat from Picasso TV coming off his big win from last night. Any love for George Niang? I can't get behind Niang. So there is no Matisse Thybulle right now for the 76ers because it's a road game. It's in Toronto. But even so, last game went into overtime. Niang played 23 minutes, scored 12 fantasy points. The playing time doesn't look there for him. He's also not a good points per minute fantasy producer. I don't have any lineups with Niang. Do you?
No, I think if you want to play that angle, Danny Green is the guy. Danny Green, 46 minutes last game, 37 and a half the game prior. Is Danny Green a good per minute player? No, but that's a ton of playing time for someone who's 4,100. If he makes knocks down a few 3-pointers, he's like basically paid off his salary already.
Yeah. I mean, Danny Green isn't a good anything at this point in his career, but Niang was never
back off. That's a Long Island product right there.
All right. So you guys live near each other that makes him better at basketball? He gets some kind of rub.
Straight.
All right. Fair enough. Was he on your he wasn't on your beach volleyball team, was he?
Oh, that would have been sick, though.
Yeah, he's tall.
Could you imagine bringing Danny Green down to a rec beach volleyball tournament? That would have been awesome.
Super chat from Mark Langford. Are Embiid and Durant good plays tonight? I have 50% and 25% respectively on DK on 200 lineups. Best sleeper. So we talked about Durant. I think it's reasonable to think he's going a little bit under-owned in this spot. He's not one of my most rostered players or anything. As for center, I actually really do like getting to Cat today as opposed to Embiid. I'm concerned about the Embiid thumb injury. Maybe it's misplaced concern for me, But I'm definitely worried that this is going to inhibit his ability to shoot for the rest of the series. So I like getting to Karl-Anthony Towns, and we could transition to the center position right now. But what do you do? What are you doing with Embiid? Because we do have those concerns with the thumb injury. I mentioned that's one of the reasons I like Harden today. But I do like Karl-Anthony Towns in a buy low spot. Are you getting to Embiid? Do you prefer Towns? Are you going elsewhere?
I prefer Embiid to Towns. The price difference is significant, but I think the upside is considerably higher with Embiid. It's a tough matchup. Toronto clearly has done a pretty good job on him so far this series. I mean, his best game is 54 points, and that came in an overtime contest. So they've kind of made him a one-dimensional type scorer. He's hitting the glass too, but very few assists, very few steals, very few blocks in this series. So he needs those peripherals to come up if he's going to have a ceiling game. But I think that, his ceiling is there, and he's going to be relatively low owned for Joel Embiid. So he's somebody that I will be taking a flyer on. But I think Pascal Siakam is the best center play on this slate.
Oh, interesting. So now that we've got Barnes coming off the bench, you're all aboard Siakam again now?
Yes.
I
mean, when I wrote this slate up earlier today, he was my favorite center play. I think that all these Toronto guys are going to just play huge minutes. And the production has been up for Siakam. Over the past month, Siakam is at 1.28 DraftKings points per minute. Towns, for example, over that same time frame is at 1.21. So I don't see a huge difference between these two guys, except for Siakam's playing more, and he's been better. So I would rather take a slight discount with him. I think he is the superior play in my eyes.
Yeah, so here's the case for Karl-Anthony Towns. I do not think he's going to pick up as much ownership as he's projected for. He's projected to be 26% owned over on FanDuel, 23% on DraftKings. We've seen this with some guys who are just in crazy buy low spots that haven't done well in the series. Like yesterday, Bam Adebayo was $7,000 on DraftKings, who's projected for 20% ownership. He ended up being sub 10% just because people are looking more at the box scores, I think, in this series, because a lot of people figure, hey, we just saw these teams play each other 2 or 3 times. This guy sucked. This guy was good. And they think those results have to continue. I don't know what the hell to make of Karl-Anthony Towns' postseason lack of success to this point. You and I mentioned at the top of the show, but I know that Karl-Anthony Towns is better than this. I know he could be better than this. I don't actually think he got prepared for this game by just sitting in his hotel room and drinking wine. I think we're going to see a better version of Karl-Anthony Towns because there's no way to go but up at this point. This is as cheap as we ever see Cat priced. I think he's probably going to have ownership in the teens because people are scared off based on what he's done. He's one of my more favorite contrarian plays on Slate. Even if he's not projected to be contrarian, I ultimately think he's going to be. So I expect I'm going to be overweight to the field on Towns. We do have one other part of the super chat from Mark Langford. You want to know who's our favorite sleeper on the slate. So who is the low owned? Here's how I'll phrase it. Who is the low owned player that you are picking up the most exposure to? I think that's a fair way to phrase it.
I really like Al Horford. I think that people are kind of scared off with the Robert Williams news, but there was kind of talk that he's going to be limited to like 20 minutes if he's active, right? Horford has been playing a ton of minutes in this series. I mean, he was at 32 in game 2, but over 41 in game 1. He's averaged 1.15 DraftKings points per minute over the past month. So I don't think this guy deserves to be sub 7K still, right? If he's going to continue to be a guy that's playing in the mid 30s minute wise, I would expect him to be getting into the 40s from a fantasy point perspective pretty regularly. And the fact that he's catching sub 10% ownership to me is just an overreaction to the Robert Williams news. I think if that never came out, if Robert Williams wasn't playing today, I would be expecting Horford to carry significantly more ownership, but I don't think Williams is going to have a huge impact on Horford's outlook.
For me, it's Vanderbilt, more so on because he's picking up some ownership on DraftKings, but FanDuel at 5% owned. That's something to be overweight too. Mark didn't specify whether the question was FanDuel or DK, so I'll answer for both. FanDuel, it is Vanderbilt for me. DK, I'm overweight to Seth Curry. I think Curry's sensible. I guess the other one, James Harden. Harden's only projected for 14% ownership on DraftKings. Just the prospect that Joel Embiid isn't fully healthy and that could inhibit his ability to take on a large role in offense. I think James Harden's a good sleeper candidate on DraftKings. I'm more than double the field on him, so that'll be my answer. Let's get back to the center position, just rounding it up. Who are the centers you have a lot of exposure to that we have not yet mentioned today?
So yeah, the top three. I will have a little bit of Gobert, even though he hasn't been great in this series so far. I mentioned how much I liked Horford. I have Brandon Clark in my player pool. I have Andre Drummond in my player pool. I have Nick Claxton in my player pool. And I even have a touch of Xavier Tillman in my player pool. So I'm going pretty deep at center today. I think that there are some strong options here. I'm playing two in quite a few lineups on DraftKings. But yeah, it's a position where I'm a bit more spread out than usual.
I like Gobert a lot. And like you said, also, the fantasy production hasn't been there. And he's also gotten into some foul trouble. But I think, once again, just given the stakes of this game, them being down 2-1, a home game, really a spot where I think they're going to really push their starters big. As long as he doesn't get into foul trouble, I think we're probably looking at close to 40 minutes for Gobert, probably the most he's played the entire season. So I do think that him being $7,400 over on DraftKings, a cheap price for him based on what we typically see. And then over on FanDuel, where he's 7,300 and gets the benefit of having the extra fantasy points for the defensive stats. Gobert is the center I have the most exposure to. It's hard to feel great about it because there's always a chance like, all right, what happens if they get down? They need shooting on the court. They went with Pascal Siakam. I mean, not Pascal. They went with Eric Pascal at times in crunch time over Gobert last game because they needed to get shooting on the court to get back into the game. It's always a risk, but I like getting to Gobert. Are you getting any exposure to Brandon Clark, Xavier Tillman, any of the center eligible bigs for the Grizzlies?
Yes, I still think Clark is very reasonable at 5K. He's somebody that I'm going to be overweight on. I'm not sure the minutes from his last game are repeatable where he saw, 29 and a half, but he doesn't need that many minutes to pay off his salary. He can do it in, 24. So I feel like 5K is still more than reasonable for him. And Tillman is somebody that I'm going to have probably about 5 to 10% of. With no Steven Adams in the rotation, it does carve out a role for him to play a couple of minutes here. And he's okay on a per minute basis. He's right under a fantasy point per minute. And it's hard to find guys that are this cheap that have the potential to pay off their salary tonight. So the answer is yes. I have exposure to all of the Grizzlies bigs with the exception of Jaren Jackson, which maybe that will come back and bite me, but so be it.
So I'm going to ask you the question that I know you don't like, but I like when we play this game. I'm going to make you guess the Memphis Grizzlies starting lineup in a second. But first, guys, we have a minute to go until lock. So if you are going to be going anywhere, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel before you leave. But you shouldn't be going anywhere because Matt and I are going to be sticking around for the next 30 minutes talking about PrizePicks, who are the sponsor of today's show. If you're signing up at PrizePicks for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo, get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. That'll also get you one free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So heading into lock, Matt, it is time. Who is going to start for the Memphis Grizzlies today? And we're just assuming Brooks plays because that adds a whole nother element into it. So let's just assume for all intents and purposes, Brooks plays. Would you agree with me? He's more likely to play than not.
I think it's a legit 50-50.
Okay.
So if Brooks plays, I think they'll roll the same starting lineup they had last game, which was Ja, Desmond Bane, Dylan Brooks, Kyle Anderson, and Triple J. If we're taking Brooks out of the equation, that's when things become interesting to me. I think that Zaire Williams would be my pick for a guy who moves into the starting lineup. When Brooks has been out so far this season, that's kind of been the route that they've liked to go. But I don't know if that necessarily means Zaire Williams is going to play like a ton of minutes. I think it would be kind of a by committee situation where, everybody would pick up a couple extra. So I'm sticking with the same lineup.
All right. So here's my guess. And I'll give two as well. I'll give one if Brooks is in, if Brooks is out. My guess is that Brooks plays. Assuming Brooks plays, My guest starting lineup is Morant, Brooks, Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Brandon Clark. Because we saw Brandon Clark start the second half ahead of Kyle Anderson last game. And it's not to say that's individually what spurred the comeback, but just the fact that he was on the court when Memphis came back. Coaches like to value that a lot. So I think they're going to go back with Brandon Clark as the starting center. Now, if Brooks is out, then I think it is going to be Morant, Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Kyle Anderson, and Brandon Clark. I think they'll just move Bane to the shooting guard and play a bigger lineup. And then they'll just have Jaren Jackson Jr. out there playing center for 3 minutes until he gets in foul trouble.
If the Grizzlies really valued that kind of stuff, then Tyus Jones should be a damn starter. All that guy does is dominate the box score plus minus. Like, the guy is just the on-off differential king. He was plus 19 in 8.5 minutes over the second half of game number 3. I love that dude. I want to start the Tyus Jones fan club. I'm sure it exists, but I want to be a part of like the
I'm sure it doesn't exist, but it could. I'm sure there's Grizzlies fans who really like him. There's certain players that I think are just really good against backups. So like, I think Tyus Jones plays a really good role for him where he's going to go in, he's going to be guarded by the likes of Malik Beasley, and then, you know, whoever ends up playing backup guard minutes for Minnesota. And it's a role he really succeeds in. I think he would just be less effective if he was playing bigger minutes against starters. I understand we've seen him play fairly well as a starter in place of Morant, but I do think the role that he has right now suits himself pretty well. And I tend to think he's going to remain a backup. We'll see. Morant and Tyus Jones, they didn't share the court together much this year, did they?
As far as I can remember, no. I think when they go with those like 2 point guard type lineups, it's usually Melton who is the
Melton rules too. They've got so here's the thing with Memphis, and it's also why I'm kind of skeptical of them in the postseason. By the way, Kyle Lowry did not practice today, so it seems pretty live that he doesn't end up playing tomorrow. I know he said he's going to play because he thinks he heals like Wolverine, but players seem to overestimate their ability to come back from injuries. But we'll see. If the Heat are without Kyle Lowry for an extended period of time, that would be a massive hit for them, especially going up against Trae Young. They were a disaster on both offense and defense after Lowry got hurt last game. But getting back to the Melton, Tyus Jones, and Memphis Grizzlies, here's one thing about this team that I think is really good for the regular season that just doesn't matter as much in the postseason. They should win the series against Minnesota, but having like an 11-man rotation and that much depth is really helpful in the regular season when guys get injured, when guys are fatigued over the course of the year. But when you're in a playoff scenario where there's more time between games, there's less travel, and then also teams are going to, you know, like 8-man rotations, a lot of them, it's just not that beneficial to be like, our 11th man is better than your 11th man, because generally those guys don't step on the court. So that's why I'm not bullish on Memphis right now for being able to make a deep playoff run. I think they're going to need Morant to improve a little bit, Jaren Jackson Jr. to shore up his foul issues, maybe add one other key piece, or maybe just Brooks and Bane get better also going forward. But I don't think they're quite ready to make a playoff run just because of that. The depth to me isn't that important in the postseason. Would you agree with that, or do you see it any differently?
Completely agree. Yeah. And even if it wasn't an issue, right? Even if, like, let's say they just had a rock star 6, 7, 8-man rotation, there's always growing pains for teams in the playoffs. It's just the way of life. You have to, have moments that you lose before you can win. It's been like that way in the NBA basically since the beginning of time, right? I mean, look at LeBron. The guy now has won 4 titles. He was a disaster in the playoffs when they first started. There was the whole thing about he can't play in the fourth quarter. So I just think that the stage is different. There's an adjustment period. That's why I love the Suns, right? That's why I love the Suns this year. I've been so high on them because last year was their learning curve, right? And now they're ready to, assuming that Devin Booker comes back, which, hopefully that happens. But I think now they're ready to take off.
By the way, we've got Mikel McDonald is in the chat saying, "Where's that idiot Josh Engelman? He just came into chat with his rookie of the year Barnes take." Well, what's your rookie of the year take? We could still entertain it, even if you're saying that idiot Josh Engelman isn't here. It doesn't mean you can't post your rookie of the year take. Whatever it is, you could come say it. By the way, I thought Mobley should have won. I don't have like a massive issue with Barnes winning. I thought Mobley was quite a bit better, particularly for valuing defense as much as I do. But still, I mean, Barnes had a really exceptional rookie year. Cade Cunningham, I think, was a step behind Mobley and Barnes, but I think he's still going to be a really good player. So, yeah, I mean,
I
this
thought
is
he was
really
the best. He's the best rookie, in my opinion. I mean, his first month of the year was terrible, but after that, I felt like he was the best rookie. What killed Mobley was just that Cavs got hurt and lost a bunch of games, right? You know, it was a lot easier to want to reward the Cavaliers players when they were, you know, fighting for a top 4 seed in the East. But the fact that they slipped all the way to the play-in tournament and then didn't qualify for the postseason, that had to have been held against them.
Yeah. So when we had the announcement that Barnes was, it was disappointing for me because I would have stood to have win a good amount of money had Mobley won Rookie of the Year. But at the same time, too, I posted odds of what I thought the realistic fair odds were for everybody to win the different awards. I don't know, like 2 weeks ago or something. I had Barnes at minus 180. I posted my odds at that point in time. Just the narrative and knowing how these things work, I thought it was fairly likely Barnes is going to end up winning just because you get that situation where down the final month of the season, Evan Mobley gets hurt. He's not playing. The Cavs fall from being one of the top teams into the play-in game. So those are just narratives that are going to work against you once you get into the voting. I get it. I don't have an issue with Barnes winning. He was great this year. Mobley was great this year. Cade Cunningham also, I think he's going to have a really good career. For this year, though, I had the other two guys that had mostly because of defense. Evan Mobley is destructive on the defense. And personally, if I was to give you, I think I might have asked you this question before at some point, but maybe I haven't asked somebody else. If I said over under 0.5 defensive player of the years over the course of the career for Evan Mobley, you're taking the over or the under?
I mean, I'd probably take the under just because I think there's a lot of volatility and stuff like that. I mean, he could suffer season-ending injury next year. I hope it doesn't happen, but I hear what you're saying. He is an elite defensive player, but it's this stuff changes. I mean, I remember we were talking once about Mitchell Robinson, and you told me that you thought he was going to be a defensive player of the year at some point, and I think the narrative on him has completely changed. It's just team success is going to dictate a lot of this stuff. For the record, the one award that the Cavaliers 100% should have won is Darius Garland should be the most improved player. He's not going to win it, but that guy went from literally
Morant won, by the way. It's not official, but Morant won.
Yeah. He went from a guy who was like bad as a rookie, like negative win shares, to just average as a second-year player to really freaking good in year 3. Ja went from like good to good, very good. I think that if we're really putting like that's, I don't know. To me, Garland was clearly the most improved player this season.
Yeah, and the other thing too, when it comes to I think everything you said about defensive player of the year. So I still think there's Mitchell Robinson could win defensive player of the year at some point. He needs to have a coach that is willing to play him more minutes though. Because when you've got
He's
a coach,
got a bit of the foulitis himself.
Yeah, he does the foul issues, but you also need a coach who isn't like it's Taj Gibson time for no reason at all, which also kind of works against him. And Arcathel's I'll just throw this out here also because he asked, and this is an easy answer for me. Would you take a bet on Kevin Porter Jr. or Jalen? I don't know which Jalen Green, I assume, will make the All-Star game next year. I think the odds of either of them making the All-Star game next year, it's like 2%.
5%. Yeah, no, I would not place a bet on either. If there's going to be one, it's going to be Jalen Green. I think Kevin Porter's chances of doing it are like 0.1%. Green at least has some upside or more upside than KPJ, but I think he's on the job path, right? Like, or the Anthony Edwards path, I think is a really a good comp for him, right? He kind of struggled with his efficiency at the beginning of his rookie year. He picked things up. And then in year 2, I think he's ready for a breakout, but it's not going to be enough to crack the All-Star game, just like it wasn't enough for Anthony Edwards to crack the All-Star game this year.
Yep, I think that's totally reasonable. By the way, on the most improved conversation, I'm with you. I would have gone Murray, though. And then I would have had Garland second. So for me,
Murray
it was
also fantastic this year.
Yeah. So for me, it was Murray 1, Garland second, and then maybe Poole third. I know a lot of people are pushing for Jordan Poole, but That's so heavily biased towards the end of the season. Poole almost fell out of the Warriors rotation in the midpoint of the year. And I think that kind of gets lost at this point in time. But there was a point where Curry was healthy and Poole was struggling, where he was just barely playing. And it's hard with some of these awards because the last month of the season in voters' eyes ends up mattering a lot more than the first 3 months of the season. Poole was good this year. He was definitely improved, but it's not like he was good last year also. He just played less minutes. I think the workload for Jordan Poole for me isn't quite enough for him to be over the likes of guys like Garland and Murray, which isn't a knock on Jordan Poole. But typically this award is given to somebody who's an all-star caliber player, which is Murray, which is Garland. Poole, while he was very good and had a breakout year, he just wasn't quite that level. So like Poole's most improved campaign, I understand why people want it to be there, or why people would have that take. But I kind of think you do need to be the player who elevates from being, like a good starter or role player to that all-star caliber player that wasn't in the past. So that's kind of how I view it. It's also, these awards, they don't have a written like, this is what the award is. It's kind of subjective, which is also why it's such good marketing for the NBA, because people are constantly debating it on the show like we're doing right now, or on social media. It constantly brings it to attention. But if you had a top three you were voting, who would be the three you vote for most improved in order?
Garland 1, DeJounte Murray 2, and then maybe even like Desmond Bane 3rd. I thought he took a nice jump this year. For me, or Ja, I would put a Grizzlies guy 3rd. But I think that the top two are a clear cut above, right? They both went from guys that had real struggles. Like, we always knew DeJounte Murray had upside, but he had never really actualized it on a basketball court. And this was the year he did that. And Darius Garland went from somebody that nobody felt good about. Nobody was thinking, oh, Darius Garland's going to be, an all-star this year. Find me one person that had that take coming into the year. And he now is one of the best point guards in the Eastern Conference. So for me, those are the clear two guys.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you also. And then 3rd, you could go Poole 3rd. I wouldn't have a massive issue with that. You could go Desmond Bane even. I think there's a lot of ways you could go 3rd. Miles Bridges would have been another one. I personally wouldn't have gone with Morant there, but also I kind of understand why people went there. He still made a meaningful leap. And if he was in the mix also, can't complain. There's a lot of good candidates for that award. And also there is no real criteria. Yeah. It's kind of whatever you want it to be, which is also something that it's whatever your opinion is on the award. It's really hard to push back unless somebody was like, I think Russell Westbrook was most improved. Like, if that's your take, that's egregious. but for the most part, whoever you pick, it's whatever your criteria is. And there's no written criteria, which makes it hard to say for sure who is going to be the guy. Somebody in chat, Kaylee Martin, is saying DeMar DeRozan most improved. He was really good this year, but he was pretty good in the previous years also. It was just more that he had more of a bigger role, certainly, than I would have expected for the Bulls this year. But yeah, I mean, how many guys have the best year of their career at age 34? And he's going to be second team All NBA.
Yeah, I do think that part of it is, he played in Toronto, which we're not really privy to what's going on up there for the most part. And San Antonio is a small market, and now he's in Chicago, which is one of the biggest cities in the country. But DeMar DeRozan has always been a baller.
All right. Are you ready to sweat what's going on in the are you ready to overreact and sweat to the first half of the first quarter of Raptors 76ers?
It's the reason I come on these shows.
Perfect. Because I think there is an actual really interesting talking point we have here. Not only is Joel Embiid struggling halfway through the first quarter, he isn't shooting at all, which is very bizarre. We are halfway through the first quarter. Joel Embiid is 0 for 1 from the field. Any kind of indication here this could have something to do with the thumb?
Yeah. I mean, it's early, so I will preface that I'm not super panicking if I play for my Joel Embiid teams yet, but don't feel great about it, right? Joel Embiid is a high volume scorer, and it's possible that he can pick things up, over the rest of this game, but one shot attempt through half of a quarter is not the kind of pace that we've come to expect from him.
No, not at all. So I think it's something to keep an eye on. If this continues this game,
How about my boy, though?
I'm also looking over at PrizePicks. I'm going to see what they have for second half props. If he continues to not shoot, I'm going to tie PrizePicks into this because PrizePicks posts lines for the second half of games. If we go into half and Joel Embiid's taking like 3 shot attempts, the second half line from his over under 15.5 points. Would you be inclined to take the under on that if we continue to just see him not hoist shots?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, he did just get another one up, missed it, but he's up to over 2 now. So yeah, if he figures if he finishes the first half with like 10 field goal attempts or less, then I think you can maybe read into that a smidge.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I don't typically look a whole ton at these second half props, but this is a very unique situation where we have a totally unknown injury about Joel Embiid. It's so unknown that the team is scared to find out what the injury is. Like they're unsure if they even want to do the MRI because they just don't know what it's going to reveal. So if we keep seeing Joel Embiid, maybe there's a situation too where you see him holding his hand, shaking it during the game. I think some live looks at the unders would make some sense. I don't have the game on right now, but we do have Howdy06 in chat is saying that Embiid is apparently holding his finger a little bit and looks like he might have injured it again. So I'm going to put that on to see if that's the case. But this is kind of certainly a little bit concerning. We'll look at some PrizePicks props in a second and see what we can make out of the first few games. But is there any futures value we could pull out of this with Embiid maybe not being 100%? Any interest in Miami Heat to win the East? They're like 4-1 now.
I'm still out on the Heat. I've been out on the Heat. I think the winner of the East comes from either Boston or the Bucks. I know that those teams probably have worse odds than lower odds than Miami, but to me, I think they're the 2 clear best teams in this conference. The Heat are good. They just, I don't know. Maybe I'm underrating them. They don't excite me. They're another team that I feel like has good depth, but they don't necessarily have that killer starting unit.
By the way, I just put Embiid is definitely hurting. I just threw the game on my computer now. He is not right. And there's something noticeably wrong with Joel Embiid. So we'll see. There was also people, I saw somebody on Twitter say that somebody went to give Joel Embiid a high five and he kind of turned it down earlier, kind of indicating he can't high five people. This is starting to get concerning for me with some of this Embiid stuff. But let's hit up
I took Joel Embiid over 3.5 high fives today, so that's a bad look.
Oh, yeah, that's no good. That's an under for sure. Let's see if PrizePicks has that posted. I don't see any high five props for Joel Embiid, but the good news is there's a lot of other props up on PrizePicks. And you guys could sign up using the promo code Awesemo to get yourself up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. But in the meantime, let's look at some of these props. And one thing that I think we should be keeping an eye on, if we find out that Luka Doncic is starting, I think some of the unders look good on guys like Jalen Brunson, potentially Spencer Dinwiddie, but more so Brunson, over under 21.5 points for him.
Oh, yeah.
That seems like a high number if Luka's starting, does it not?
Very high, yeah. I would be very happy to take the under there.
Yeah, that is certainly something I have my eye on. Once again, we've got what's supposedly going to be a minutes restriction for Luka, but I don't think that means he plays 20 minutes. I don't think we're looking at the Steph Curry treatment or anything. So under 21.5 points, that is something that immediately stands out to me when it comes for Jalen Brunson. If you have PrizePicks up right now, if you don't, I'll give you a second to pull it up. But is there anything that immediately catches your eye?
So one thing that I want to look at here is the over on Kevin Durant assists. I think I love Kevin Durant today in fantasy. I know the Celtics have a great defense, really, really great defense. No disrespect to them. There's no defense on the planet that can really shut down Kevin Durant, right? It's a combination of bad shots and making life tougher for him, but he's still going to make them eventually, right? And like we saw that with Milwaukee, they gave him as much attention as they possibly could last year, and he still torched them. So I'm expecting this to be a big bounce back spot for him, but with the way the team has defended him, I think the over on his assist prop is the most appealing one to me. Set at 5.5. I think I projected Durant for about 44 minutes today. If he plays that much and the Celtics continue to throw double and triple teams at him, he should be able to cruise over 5.5 dimes.
So I have a Nets prop that is not Kevin Durant, but also, like I said, Nets related. Over 7 rebounds for Andre Drummond. I know the rebounds haven't been there in the first couple of games of the series, and it might seem like the minutes aren't there because he's not playing, 26 or 28 minutes like he was during a lot of the regular season. But I haven't projected for over 10 rebounds. We have over on Awesemo, we have him projected for 9.8 rebounds. So all that considered, that's still well over that 7 number. And the other thing to think about too, he plays 24 minutes last game, 17 minutes in game 1. Overall for the season, he only played 19 and a half minutes per game, and he averaged 9.2 rebounds. So we don't have to get 26, 27 minutes out of Andre Drummond. Realistically, if he plays even just 17 minutes, we're probably looking at more likely than not that he hits the over 7 rebounds. And, also keep in mind, 7 would be a push. So I like that over 7 number. Do you like that number, or do you just think the playing time isn't enough?
No, I think Drummond doesn't need minutes, like you said. Odd Shopper gives that prop that's the most profitable expected prop on this slate. 76% expected win rate on over 7.5 boards. So I agree. I think that's a great selection. I'll throw one more out there. I'm going to take over 3 made 3-pointers for Donovan Mitchell. I've talked about the shot volume with Mitchell. It's why I like him so much in DFS. He's been, a high 30s usage type guy, and a lot of his shots come from behind the arc. He's, averaging, I want to say close to 10 3-point attempts per game this season. So all we need for him is to be average, and he should be able to get to 3. And if he gets hot, he can fly past 3. So I think that this is a prop that makes sense to me. I like the over there.
All right, we'll get back to these in a second, but let's catch up on the 76ers Raptors game. We are now almost at the end of the first quarter. Joel Embiid has played 10 minutes. He's 0 for 4 from the field with 1 point.
Not good.
If this is really an issue, I feel like there has to be some.
This might be a good time to try and hop on the Raptors live. Because they're
down. Not a bad, that's not a bad call. What is the line for the game? Let's see. I'm pulling it up. This is also going to be, all kinds of. It's hard for people listening to take action on it just because of the delays involved. But all right, DK doesn't have a lineup yet. I'll pull up FanDuel to see where they are at. What do they have it? So the Raptors are underdogs right now, but it's a close line. It's only, but it's plus 114.
That works for me. I mean, a hobbled Joel Embiid, who's now 0 for 4. I mean, like the 76ers have survived thanks to Shake Milton giving them 5 points off the bench in 4 minutes. And Tobias Harris is off to a good start. I'm okay with if you think Embiid is going to be limited. I don't think that they deserve to be favored in this game.
Yep. No, I think that's a reasonable enough way to look at it. And if I have to add another narrative type thing into the mix, because now we're really just now we're oh, by the way, somebody just messaged me to say that DraftKings still had, there's still live prop lines up on Joel Embiid's points, and they haven't changed it all from the start of the game. If that's the case, that's pretty insane. Let's see.
Live player props.
It's so low though. It's 22. I'm not betting under 22.
Yeah, no, you can't do that.
that's a low number. I like the point that we have in I like the thought that we had in chat from 024631, but that's such a low number unless he got like a little bit higher of a number before betting the under. But I'm not taking under 22.5 for Joel Embiid in the game. I understand it's about as slow a start as possible, but it's not looking good for Embiid right now, health-wise, just based on some of the body language of what I'm seeing right here. But this aside, also, when we're talking about Joel Embiid and the injury news and the live betting, here's something else to consider. The Raptors are down 3-0 in this series. They absolutely have to win this game. As for the 76ers, they would like to win the game and close out the series. But if Joel Embiid isn't feeling great, are they really going to push everybody that hard in this game? not as hard as what I think the Raptors will. That's the narrative that I would lean into here. So the more I think about it, I don't mind. I don't mind the money line there on the Raptors, considering what we're seeing out of Joel Embiid.
Love it.
What is it now?
I don't mind it. I love it.
Stoppage in play right now. Let's see, plus 115 for the Raptors. Yeah, I don't mind it either. I'll make a smaller bet on it. A 140 now is the line. All right, I could get behind 140. Plus 140. I like that number because the Sixers took lead. Here's what's also really hard about live betting. I don't know if you've ever tried to do this, but if you try to do it when the games are in action, oftentimes it's just impossible to get numbers because the bets constantly get declined because the line updates. So you kind of have to wait for a stoppage in play. But either way, once the game, if we still see kind of like a reasonable type line here on Toronto by the time we finish, I'll try to do that. Let's wrap this up by trying to bring a couple more good prize picks options here to the people's attention. So we've gone over Drummond, Brunson. We found some ones we like. Matt, give me one more for the people before we head out. Prize picks, prop. What should people be putting their money on?
Okay. I was going to take under 9.5 assists for Ja, but it looks like that number is at 8.5 on prize picks. So I'm a little less bullish on that number. Here's one. Jason Tatum over 7 boards. We have him projected right now for 8.4. Tatum has been playing tons of minutes along with Jaylen Brown. You've talked about his improvement in the peripheral categories, mainly his ability as a distributor has looked much better in this playoffs, but Tatum is also very capable on the glass. He only had 6 boards in their last game, but he's got at least 9 in 2 of his past 4. I'm okay with over on 7 boards, given how that prop is grading out on Odd Shopper. Expected win rate of 60%.
0 for 5 from the field for Joel Embiid now. And he hasn't, at least he hasn't come off the court. You know, they don't think he's hurt enough to where they have to remove him from play.
Fair.
He just got taken off the court, Greg. I have the
that's because the quarter is
his
basically
rotation
over.
So
there's 17 seconds left in the quarter, so they take Joel Embiid out to prevent a foul or whatever at the end of the quarter. But I mean, he played almost the entire first quarter and went 0 for 5 from the field. Let me look back at the prize picks. I know we said before that I don't like the under 22.5 from the game for Joel Embiid. Under 15.5 for just the second half. Could you get behind that number?
I still think I just prefer the Raptors money line, but
okay.
I can definitely get behind under 15. And I think I just had a scoreless or a 1-point first quarter, yes. And there's been report that he might have torn ligaments in his wrist. So I think given everything we've seen, there's clearly some evidence to support the under being a good play.
And then by the same merit, because these are going to be correlated. So we're going to go into, if we're going into prize picks, we're building a second half player prop card. The under on Joel Embiid makes sense, but what can we correlate that with? Because we like the under for him. It probably means there's more shots going to other guys on Philly. So we've got 10.5 second half points for James Harden, 7.5 for Tobias Harris, 9.5 for Tyrese Maxey. Do any of those overs make sense to you for a correlation with an under of Joel Embiid's points?
Toby, Long Island, stand up, baby. Long Island in the building. No, I mean, Tobias Harris, I think, has always been a guy that has been at his best when the 76ers have been a bit shorthanded, and he just put together a great first quarter. I think he would be like the primary usage beneficiary in my eyes. So I would love that as a correlated parlay. Under Embiid, over Toby.
I can get behind that. And that is going to do it for us today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't done it yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check out all the content we have the rest of the day. MMA Live Before Lock, that'll be up in a couple hours. Check you guys on Monday. I'll be back. See ya.